In this video, I'm going to go back over materials. This is in part because your final project is coming up. And also, I haven't spoken on materials since the beginning of this course. To get started, I'm actually going to use the 014 particle distance file. If you'll recall, I talked about material with the Polo again at the beginning of this course, and I just thought it would be nice to look at something different. To get started, remember this file was on particle distance, so I'm actually going to go ahead and reset it. I'll go ahead and select this pattern piece, open up my property editor, and you'll see the particle distance is set to 75, which is why this skirt looks so crumbly. I'm going to set it to 20, and I'll just give that a beat to work. And remember, when you update particle distance, you need to simulate, and you'll see the skirt loosen up. Okay. Now I want to go ahead and open my object browser and just go ahead and point out that, remember, this is made out of the default fabric. The default fabric is something that's unique to Clo, and it doesn't have any physical property. It's going to have its own drape, so it's something that may not correlate with a material that you would actually choose for this garment. It's something that was made just to, run very efficiently as you create your patterns and sort of test things in the Clo interface. So what I want to make sure that you do prior to moving into the final stages of your project and assuming that your garments are pretty much done is I want you to go back through all of them and make sure that you have assigned fabrics. This is going to become really evident when we look at your BOM, and you'll see here it's going to be listed. Again, it's just default fabric. All right, so that is not something I want to see on the BOM. So how do we assign fabrics? Remember, you'll go to your library, and Clo actually comes with lots of fabrics. And if you go ahead and double click the folder, again, this is just the Clo folder, you'll see a large list of fabrics available for use on your projects. Okay. In this case, I will just go ahead and use the linen. And I'm going to grab a linen, drag it over to the object browser. Now, this is really important. I want to make sure that you're approaching it this way because even though you can actually apply fabric in a lot of different ways, so again, I can click and drag it over to the object browser. I can double click on the library. I can also right click. Oh, actually, I can't right click. I'm sorry. I can't do that with the fabric. You can do that with the prints. So just again, make sure you assign the fabric. However, I'm sorry, you can click and drag this over to your garment. Okay. All right. But after all that being said and done, again, remember, just drag it over to the object browser. Okay. Once that is placed, you'll see that the information for that particular fabric becomes available to you in the property editor. And if you start to scroll down, you'll see things like, obviously, it's a linen and it's a woven. You can continue to scroll down and see more information. Okay. Now, what I want to do first, before I break down more of the property editor, is I want to go ahead and duplicate this fabric. And to do that, I have this active. You see it's all lit up, and I'll go ahead and hit copy. And that way I'll have two versions of the exact same fabric. The content is exactly the same, the normal map associated with it, and the texture that's generated is all the same. Okay. Now the only thing I need to do is go ahead and apply it to my pattern pieces. And I'm going to go back to my regular linen, and you'll see I can click and drag that over. Okay. And that's, being applied to the back of my garment. And I will pan correctly. Okay. And you'll see that that has been changed because you can now see a texture. Okay. Again, if I pan up and get very, very close to this fabric, okay, there's a texture applied now, whereas that default fabric has none. I'm going to reset and just go ahead and apply that to the rest of my pieces. Okay, and I'll probably just go ahead and do it to the top. Okay, and I'll use something else on the bottom. So again, I'll click on this linen, and just to help make it absolutely crystal clear that I have made that change, because it's set to white right now, I'm going to go ahead and click on this white panel and just go ahead and choose a color. Okay, and I'll go ahead and change that. And you can see I did not change the other ones the way I thought I had. Okay, let's click and drag. All right. I don't know what's going on with my computer, but there we go. All right, so now I have these 4 pieces set in the seam fabric. I can rotate, they're all set to pink. Okay, and perhaps I'll go ahead and do to the waistband as well. All right, now the skirt is still set to the default. And what I can do is I'll go ahead and assign linen copy. All right, so now it's at least all made out of the same fabric. So you can see the same texture is being applied to everything. All right, so if I wanted to have more of a color blocked kind of look, that might be enough. But of course, I will be talking about print shortly, and I will apply the print to some piece here. Okay. So going back to my pink linen, I'm going to scroll back to the top. And again, just working through this property editor, most of this we have talked about. Okay, again, linen, it's a woven. I'm working with the front here. So this is the front's appearance. I can change the look of this. Okay, so I can assign something that is shinier versus what was matte a moment ago. I can assign something that has more of a velvet appearance. Okay. You'll see here texture, there's nothing present because there's no print associated with this. You'll see a normal map, of course, and the normal map is what is driving the texture that is present here. Okay. Again, these were all things that we have talked about previously. Okay. So to dive just a tiny bit deeper into normal maps, again, I've said that the normal map is what is associated with the texture that you see. Again, normal maps are images, and they are what express detail like texture. They add realism, they scatter light across the fabric surface, which is really evident here because I have this velvet attached. Okay, and I clicked on that and opened that up, and you can see that those were image files. You also see below this something called a displacement map. We'll talk more deeply about that when we get to graphics, but those would be grayscale images that are used to add height. They add additional geometry. They're really useful for things like knits and sherpas. Here you'll see color. Again, I had added that pink color. You'll see also there's this option for opacity. And opacity affects whether this is a sheer fabric, okay, or whether it's totally opaque and not see-through in any sense. Below that, you'll see reflection. And reflection basically, well, it's made up of roughness and reflection. And so roughness, you have an intensity that you can work with. You can lower this and make it smoother, okay? You'll see as I go in the opposite direction here, it's getting very, very smooth, now almost shiny. And then if I come up in the other direction, it's rougher, okay? So the roughness slider adjusts the reflective qualities, and the rougher it gets, the more it's going to absorb light. Okay, the smoother it gets, it's going to reflect light. You can see that shift. Okay. You can also add roughness maps to this. So if I move from intensity to map here, I could actually add a map. Okay, I'm going to go back to intensity. And a map is just, it's another image that you can add just to add a little bit more distinctiveness to the fabric. Okay. You'll see here you have transformation, and if I had a print associated with this, I could go through and change the scale of the print, and I'll come back and do this later. You'll want to lock your aspect ratio if you want to constrain the proportions. So again, you know, when this is locked, I can change my length and the width will change correspondingly. Okay. And then down here you see physical property. Again, I'm using a preset. This is coming from the library, so all of these were available to me. I'm using it as it's been given to me. But you'll also see here that you have this option for additional details. And there's a lot here, okay? So I'm not gonna go too deep, but Again, I want to go more deeply than I did at the beginning of the course. So some things here to pay attention to are things like stretch. Obviously, stretch are what's going to give a pattern piece or fabric more elasticity and stretch. So the higher the number, the more rigid it's going to be. And this is a linen now with a velvet type associated with it. So it's not going to be very stretchy typically. And the lower it is, the stretchier it's going to be. Okay. You'll see most of these have several options. So that's stretch on the weft and the warp. You also have shear here, and that's going to be the stretch value associated with the fabric's bias. All right, so if you have experience sewing, again, if you're one of the designers, this is something you probably have much more experience with. Um, Again, if you are not a sewer, most of these things, guys, you can consider just leaving it as the defaults. Okay, coming down further, you'll see that you have these options for bending, and that controls the fabric's stiffness or its resistance to drape. So the higher the number, you're thinking things like a really stiff denim, excuse me, and low would be something like a silk that's really meant to, swing and drape on the body. Again, there's several bending, there's several buckling, and buckling is the shape of the fabric's crease. Okay, so you'll see that there are a lot of different aspects that you can adjust. So you've got ratio weft and warp, you've got bias, then you've got stiffness weft for all of those. Okay, down below that, you'll see that you have internal damping. And this, regardless of whether you know how to sew or you're a designer versus merchandiser, internal damping is really important because this comes into play during animation. And the internal damping is what reduces the bounciness of a fabric. So as you can imagine in animation, if you have fabric that is just bouncing and up and down, it may slow down your animation. Your computer may frankly just struggle more with it. So you can adjust that number as need be. Density is essentially just the weight of the fabric. Okay, and Chloe measures that in grams per square millimeters. I had to read that. Okay. You also have friction coefficient here, which is the friction between fabrics. So if you have several fabrics that are layered on top of each other and you expect them to slide against each other, or you expect them not to move very much, again, you can adjust that friction coefficient. And then lastly, down here, you'll see that you have thickness, and that's just the visual thickness of the garment. So taking into consideration something like velvet that I tend to think of personally as being fairly thick, I may come in here and look more closely at my fabric, and perhaps if it doesn't look like it's got the thickness that I expect, I could come in and consider thickening that up. Okay, and that does look a little bit thinner than I would personally expect it to be. All right. So having gone through everything associated with my linen, I want to briefly just go back over prints, and I'll just reset my view here. And I'll go to my linen copy 1, and I might just go ahead and set that to fabric velvet as well, just so I have, just so it looks like this is meant to go together a little bit more purposefully. Okay. And what I'm going to do is let's go ahead and assign it a print. And again, I'm on this fabric. Okay. And while I'm on this fabric, I want to assign a print. And I want to do this very purposefully by dragging and dropping it right here into my texture. Okay. So to get to my prints, I'm going to navigate to where I have my prints saved. Okay. Remember, I shared all of these with you. And it's going to take it a moment to load. There's quite a few of them. And once those get loaded, I will look for something appropriate. When I started this assignment, I wasn't really expecting this to go quite so formal. So I'm not sure I actually have a print that I will want to work with here, but we will make it work. All right, and I'm just not seeing much, but I'm kind of digging this plaid, so I'm going to grab the plaid. So again, I'm going to click this, I'm going to drag it over to texture, and I'm going to drop that. And you'll see the print is immediately applied because this fabric is applied to this pattern piece, and I have changed this fabric to now have a texture, okay? And now that this has a texture, I'm going to click off. Maybe I'll just make some adjustments here. I'm not sure that pink is really the appropriate color, so I'll go ahead and change this. And remember, you can change color using your eyedropper. I'll just come over and maybe pick up a blue. Okay, to get out of my eyedropper, I need to hit escape, and then I'll just hit OK. All right, and this is all, again, still made out of this linen velvet. And I'll go ahead and just close my library for the time being. And I'll go ahead and close my object browser and my property editor. And at this point, let's say I want to scale this print. To do that, I'll go ahead and just make sure that that's active. And I'm going to come over here to my edit texture. Okay, and I'll click on it just again to make sure it's active. And remember, there are a few tools here that you can play with. I can grab this handle and drag it around. Okay, and this is just moving the pattern piece on the roll of fabric. All right, so I could control where that's being cut, and I can just control the placement. Okay, it doesn't make a huge deal here with a plaid, but it may for a larger scale print if I'm trying to maybe center something in the front of her body. Okay, so again, this just moves the print. I can come over here and rotate it. Okay, and again, if you hold shift, it'll lock you into 90 and 45, okay, as you work around. And then using these handles, you can scale. You can either just do it vertically or horizontally. But if you do it in just one direction, remember it's going to warp the print. So it's best to work, okay, where you're constraining the proportions. So I can go ahead and make that print really, really small. I can go ahead and just make it super, super large, which I kind of like, okay. Now I've done all of that in the 3D window. I can actually do the same thing in the 2D. So if I go ahead again, just select my pattern piece, I have edit texture over here as well, okay. Again, I can use my slider to move my print around, okay. I can rotate it. Everything is the same. The only real difference here is that if I scale this and I scale it and then right click, there we go, you'll get your transform dialog box. And you'll see I'm currently at a scale of 100 and almost 150%. Okay, so recall when you guys were presenting last week and Ms. Caskey kept asking, you know, what is the scale? What is the scale? What is the scale? You know, if that's something that you'd like to include in your presentation because you've made some significant changes or you were one of the people that felt like, you know, she asked that question of you a lot, you know, go ahead and take a peek at this and go ahead and write down a percentage, okay? Just take into account, you know, I've already made some changes prior to getting to this point. You know, and then compare your prints against each other and just make sure all the percentages make sense against each other, okay? I'm gonna go ahead and hit cancel here. And we've run through applying the prints, we have scaled them, we have rotated them, we have moved them. I want to make sure you see that you can, before you exit this project, before you can really move on to anything else, you will either work on your colorways first, or if you know, for instance, that you know, this print is perhaps going to be used on a lot of your other garments, and your other colorways maybe are just going to be changes to the color of the top. What you can do is go ahead and look at your print layout, and when you open print layout, okay, you'll see the width of your fabric roll. Okay, and this one is set to 44 inches, which looks okay. And then you'll see that I actually, because I'm using two different fabrics, I can come over to the second one and I will just zoom out for a moment. And I want to go ahead and place this on my roll. And you're going to see immediately that this is actually too large, okay? And I just clicked this and dragged this. The other thing I could do would be right click and reset to default arrangement, and that will just automatically place it for me. So again, my pattern piece is too large for this roll. And if you look at your property editor, you'll see that you can increase the width. And so I went from 44 inches to 55. All right. And in that case, my pattern piece will fit. And since I've already done that on this one, I'll go back to my blue roll, and maybe I'll just see if I take this to 55, could I bring my sleeves up here, and perhaps I could use my fabric a little bit more efficiently, and I can, okay? So using this 55-inch roll, now the length that needs to be cut is half a yard, all right? Now this is important, okay? And again, this is something I wanna make sure you are thinking through, making sure that your fabric, again, can actually fit on the roll, because this information will come up on your BOM, okay? And your BOM is a little preview essentially of, again, it's your bill of materials. So it's going to be what goes into making this garment. And so this is telling me that for my blue linen, I'm going to need about half a yard. And for my skirt, I'm going to need almost 1.5 yards. And this is editable. Okay, so I can actually come in here, for instance, and put in a price. And this is just defaulting to $1. And this is $1 per yard. So the cost for about half a yard is 46 cents. Okay, $1 per yard for almost 1.5. You'll see it's $1.36. Now, that's all that's coming up on my BOM, because that's all that I have associated with this garment. There are no buttons, there are no buttonholes, I don't have any top stitch. Okay, this garment, again, is just, it's not really done in the true sense of the word. So again, if this were something that you were turning into me, I would definitely be looking to see if this were finished. I would definitely be looking at the back of this garment and asking, for instance, how is her head supposed to get through this? It's a linen. Is it stretchy? Will it stretch to accommodate her head? Or do we need to think about opening this up and maybe putting a button closure? All right. And again, if you have a button closure, you will have a button on your object browser, and your button will be listed here on your bill of materials. Okay. You'll also note that this is for colorway A. I didn't create another colorway. I've gone over colorways once before, and again, I'm kind of running through all of these sort of closing tasks over the next couple of days. So I will go over colorway again, so that hopefully will illuminate if you are not recalling how to do that, and hopefully we'll dive a little deeper for anyone who is thinking that's old news. I've already done that. So again, I'll go ahead and quickly say that we're going to look at print layout, which we've done, colorway, you have the BOM, which is something we'll cover, and then I will also go over animation by the end of the week. And that's really going to depend on some of your computers. I'm hoping everyone will be able to animate and actually have their avatar walking, so we can put those in your videos, and it will just, elevate the appearance of all of the CLO work that you have done over the last 3 weeks. Okay, I will go ahead and end materials there.